Oh, okay, cool.
All right, we're here.
I'm here too. So what do you want to talk about today?
I was kind of thinking about this as I was preparing, and I was like, maybe we should get into some juice, some like meat of something. Because
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like our last couple of sessions have been kind of like, on the periphery of things, but I'm curious what's on your mind whenever I say that. Like what comes up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I I could identify with that. I feel like we've just been kind of talking about topics based upon like phenomena and things that are happening in our lives and kind of going into, things from that doorway. But maybe, yeah, we should pick something that's really big or present in our world today that we could talk on. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what are I could name a couple of things, two or three things that are like biggest in my view of what's going on. Maybe I'll lay those out and you could bring a few options up and then we could settle on one.
Sure.
Um, and I think we've probably touched on some of these things in the past, but not gone really full deep into it. But I would say like maybe one of the things is like men's inability to ask for help, or maybe men's like ignorance, should we say, or like lack of ability to see themselves clearly, or like a lack of desire to see themselves at all. That's one big one. Another one could be like um collective. That's hard to put into words, but maybe like why good people don't take action to make the world better.
Ooh.
Um, and another one is just, I would say, like, how do we, like, why people are distant from each other, what the effects are, and why that's important. Or like, yeah, basically like maybe an analysis of societies, kind of like the whole atomic family model versus more of a holistic community or tribal kind of model of things. I think that's really important too, because the lack, in my mind, the lack of like connection and communication contributes to all of the other problems. So those are three things that come up in my mind.
Well, I right before we got on the call, I just saw there was an Instagram person that I follow, Move Like Human, I think it is, and he just
Okay.
made a video about how I guess I don't know if it's this month or next month is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And
Okay.
he kind of said before we can address men's mental health, we need to talk about how we have forgotten that we're animals and that we aren't, we're like, we think we're removed from the animal world
Yeah.
and how that is disrupting like our ability to connect with ourselves and each other. And I
Yeah.
thought, I mean, the work that I do with Call of the Wild and Kimberly Ann Johnson is a lot of animal, even as a woman, coming back to our animal instincts, developing the intuition through our connection with ourselves and nature.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly a big topic I've that we could get into. What are a couple other ones?
Oh, and then I really like the breakdown of the nuclear family. I think that's like, I don't know if I'd say trendy, but I feel like it's upcoming trend.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Um, we could also, these are all pretty like big societal things. We could also zoom into more of an individual level. If that feels interesting or important to you too. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about culture. Collectively is always really super fascinating and something I've always been tuned into. I think that the culture has been shifting so quickly in the last several years with either
Yeah,
it's technology or something, but I
yeah,
think we're starting to see, a branching off of like how do we create culture, or like how do we return to culture, and like what can we take from the past to
yeah,
bring to the present and the future.
yeah,
um but then like as on the individual level, we also have this hyper individualism in our country, in the United States, and probably like the West, if you will.
yeah,
um and how do we break that down, to still maintain our autonomy and like sense of self
yeah,
while interacting within a community.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's like super interesting too, just because it's like not a black and white thing. Like we have hyper individualism, but that doesn't mean you lose everything if you move into like a collective or like a dependent culture or something like that. There's
yeah,
you maintain that sense of self while still being in
yeah,
community.
yeah, yeah. Um, that would be a really fun topic to delve into. I want to circle back to that word juicy that you use. Um, like, do any of these things really fit that description or like give you that feeling or fall into that feeling?
um, I
Like,
mean,
okay, maybe here's, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you.
no, you're good.
Like juicy usually means like there's a lot there, and not only is there a lot there that's real and present, but there's also like some fire or intensity or personal connection to it. That's generally, I feel like what those are like the Venn diagrams that circle into the
Yeah.
word juicy. Um, so
Well,
yeah,
I was thinking like from our listeners' point of view,
yeah,
would it be
yeah,
like, one, what do they want to hear us talk about? I think that we
right,
bring together some
right.
really interesting components, but like from a listening perspective, what do they want to hear about, and I think that requires a bit of what fires us up.
Yeah, yeah. What would they want to hear? As far as my audience, I think like men that are attracted to what I have to say are interested in like feeling more powerful or empowered in their life, feeling like they have more control over themselves, like over their own personal internal workings and also their external landscape. Um, and who are trying to feel satisfied and in the driver's seat and like connected and like I feel like my audience are men that don't want to be living lives that are like empty or false or fake, where they basically just aren't seen, aren't recognized for who they are, aren't expressing their unique talents or gifts or like, their way that they communicate and they're like invisible, like their real self is invisible. So I think they're trying to bring that out and I don't know, reintegrate themselves, or reconnect these parts of themselves together and have that whole self be expressed externally and get the rewards of relationship, sex, money, recognition, from self and from others, so like what are they interested in? And like I don't know why things aren't working. Um, you know, how, or maybe how have they been failed and how are they failing? Maybe like being able to see underlying sources of like what's going on in their life, whether that's externally or internally, and also like some answers and a way forward. Um, yeah,
This reminds me of something else I've seen on the internet where they talk about my cat's behind me where they talk about sitting with sitting with women who have been through healing their wounds around men
yeah,
is a different conversation. And I think as I'm hearing you talk about like the men that you work with and what they're interested in, I think something that comes up for me in that is there was once a time whenever I was the kind of feminist that was like, men are bad. And now it's like what I see is men living in their power, in their true essence. That's a really beautiful thing.
yeah,
That's a really beautiful thing. And I think the world is sort of asking men to stand up and kind of, look at that. And the conversation between women and men it's gonna have to be very different pretty soon,
yes,
I feel like.
yeah, yes, yeah. I
And
think
so
that,
I'm curious what you think that conversation, like what is the difference there? What kind of different conversation do you foresee?
yeah, that is a good juicy point. That's like because what we're talking about is the intersection of the what we identify as maybe two polarities or two major groups of the world, and how those groups are interacting or not interacting. And like the world is different, the world will continue to change. And if we're moving in the direction of positivity, of growth, of like greater levels of peace, connection, accomplishment, balance, like how do men and women start to I connect? What do those conversations look like? Thinking about that makes me think about like there needs to be foundational new foundational understandings for those connections to occur, right? Because right now there's like there's several different camps, worlds of thought, right? And they are interacting on a daily basis. And sometimes those result in conflict, and sometimes those result in like cooperation and building, right? So, but I feel like the view, like, there's several different viewpoints that men have of women, and there's several viewpoints that women have of men. So some people are engaged in the same old dynamics, right? And some of them are so unconscious that they're just going to do that for the rest of their lives. Some of them are going to become conscious or have become or are becoming conscious to the point where they realize, I don't want this old dynamic anymore. I want a different way of connecting and relating to each other, right? And I think it feels to me feels very, very clear that there's a lot more women who are aware of like, I don't like this dynamic and I want it to change because it's hurting me and it's isolating, right? And so there's the big pain point. There's the big, large red flashing light bulb, right? And men are like not looking at any light bulbs anywhere, either on the other side of the fence or their own, right? And that's one of the old viewpoints. Like they're so unconscious or addicted or drunk or whatever that they are unconscious to the dynamics that are at play, or there are more and more waking up to realize like not only is this dynamic not working for them, I think men are more thinking about themselves, like not like how do I make a better experience for them? It's I'm having a bad experience and maybe it's their fault. Well, maybe it's my fault, right? How do I have a better experience, right? They're not thinking a lot of the men who are waking up aren't thinking about the pain that women are having. They're thinking about the pain that they are having as a result of this terrible dynamic, right? Um, yeah. So, but for the new conversations, the new conversations to occur more often, these like new foundational ways of viewing self and other need to be understood and accepted. That's my perspective.
Do you think there was two things that came up for me there in what you were just saying? Do you think that it's required for men, because that's who we're talking about right now, but specifically anybody, to get to a certain point? I want to have more fulfilling relationships. I want to feel less isolated, whatever the like thing may be. Do you feel like there has to be a moment where you retreat inward to think about yourself? Do you think it's possible for men to think about themselves and not necessarily worry about the hurt of women or whoever in order to open up enough to let in that, like, oh, I really hurt women, whether consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah. Is there is that a requirement? Is that the question? Is it a requirement for men to like go
Yeah,
in?
or like, is that part of the process? Like, is that like a necessary step that sort of needs to happen in order for a man to feel, I don't want to say healed because we're never really healed, but like,
Right,
in the process, being able to see a woman or
right.
see the hurt that he maybe has caused.
Yeah, yes, yes. There needs to be like a broadening of awareness, and there needs to be self-reflection. You can't, none of this can happen without that. It's like saying, can you plant corn in a state that you've never been to? Like,
Right.
no, you can't. You have there to then understand what's possible in that space, right? So you have to leave where you are, and it is a requirement. And like, I think if we're using this metaphor, some men will just drive to the edge of their state and look across the state line and be like, "Oh, there it is," and then drive back. You know, um, or some people cross over and stop at the gas station, or some people, and then some people buy a house, right, and start digging up the soil to plant their corn,
And
right?
maybe like read a book
Um,
about that state's planting something,
right.
you know.
Yeah, right, sure, yeah. Yes, yes. So it is a requirement. It is a requirement. And I think there's a question of like, how does that happen? Right. And I think there's several ways. Um, one is one is that there's been enough, it's all related to pain. This is how the human functions, a human organism functions by pain and pleasure, right? So there has to be, in most cases, not all cases, but well, I guess it is all cases. It's just that people have different levels of sensitivity to pain, right? So just like, I am 5'10" and someone else is 6'3" or whatever, like someone is going to be more sensitive than me or taller than me. Someone's going to be less sensitive than me or shorter than me, right? Just like we all have these physical attributes that are widely different. We have these non-physical attributes that are different. So your tolerance and sensitivity to pain is going to be greater or less than anybody else's. And that means that if you have a really low tolerance to emotional pain and discomfort, it's not going to take a whole lot for you to think, for your mind to go to draw the conclusions to say, maybe something needs to change because this little thing is quite painful and I don't want it to be painful anymore, right? So it might not take much for them. If they're really sensitive, all it takes is for someone else to be in pain. You don't have to be in pain. Someone else has to be in pain, and you can realize, oh, something needs to change here. This isn't okay, right? But if you have a really low, or let's say you have a really high tolerance, you could be in pain, great amounts of pain, and be unaware of it, or aware of it, but like somehow able to tolerate it on a functional level. But that doesn't mean you are thriving, but you are alive, you know. So, but I'm of the belief that men and women, anybody, needs to experience pain of a particular level before they decide to start to look beyond their borders and to investigate what's going on and why, and can something different happen?
Mhm. Mhm.
What do you think of that?
It sounds to me like you're saying also stretching a bit of the capacity for like you were saying, when someone feels pain, then what can you tolerate? Like what can you just be okay with? And then at what point is this pain has become too big and I need to like take action on it. So it's like
Yeah,
stretching your capacity for like pain and remedy.
yeah, yeah. I would say, yeah, stretching capacity is one way to say it, or I would say like um becoming attuned to the like sensors that your body and mind, your psyche has, right? So it's not like I mean it's just semantics that we're talking about here, but like we're talking about broadening or increasing sensitivity to notice, or making more space to notice something, or becoming more sensitive to notice something. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's I love those words too because like I'm creating a like trying to decide if I want to make it a 6 or 10 week course, but it's
Hmm.
all about that like body wisdom and noticing the sensors,
Yeah,
noticing the sensations, and then
yeah,
being able to interpret them.
yeah. Yeah, that's that would be a great course for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be running a pilot on it soon, so you can be one of my pilot people if you want.
And that's
Um,
great. Yeah.
So something else I thought about and I typed my little note to myself so I didn't forget. But what do you think if you could come up with like 3 or 5, maybe three, I don't know, kind of guideposts for, well, okay, let me set this up a little bit differently. So there are going to be some men who choose, like they've had this pain and then they're going to choose to remedy this. They're going to choose to find a way for healing, right? They're going to be
Yep.
in the process of this healing. And then there's some men or people really, but like we're talking about men right now. So there's going to be some men who feel the pain and they're just going to be like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to go to the state and I'm going to drive back home, right?
Right.
If you could come up with like 3 or 5 different like guideposts to know, like how, if I were a woman trying to recognize a man who's on that journey, what would you say it would look like?
That's a good question. Um, First thing that comes to mind is that they have a therapist. Um, and I say that because I think it's true and important. I also want to put a disclaimer in there that like men can be doing the work without a therapist. You might not, someone listening to this might not believe that to be true, but I think you can get a lot done working without a mental health professional. Um, I don't think you can get everything done, or you can't engage with everything, you know. I know that there are coaches and groups out there doing great work to help men who are in a phase of growing and changing or healing or integrating themselves. So I don't want to say that they have to be, but if someone is, that's definitely one signpost. Another signpost is like, yeah, a general expression of feeling, um, general expression of feeling, and that can be mm, hearing them use statements about like, I feel tired, I feel stressed, I feel like uncomfortable, I feel foggy, things like that. Like I think a man that uses those like I feel words really frequently, like that's a signpost. It's also not an indicator that someone's doing their work. I think it's an indicator of an individual who either is doing the work or like has a great capacity to do work because they have sensitivity and they're expressing their awareness of that sensitivity.
Mhm.
So let's see. Other things, yeah, healthy friendships. They eat well and take care of themselves. I know like as a man, that's been difficult for me in my life. And I think that that's pretty common, and I'm not sure why, but men can just like eat junk or eat the same things or like have a lack of concern for how and what they're eating at times. So I think if there's a man who is like cooking and eating well, it means that they know how to care for their own body, and then they can also have care and empathy because that's like being empathetic toward yourself. Like, oh, I'm hungry, but food isn't just about hunger. It's about nourishment of your mind and your senses, right? Eating food includes all of your senses, and it's an act that covers so many bases. Can, it touches on like mood and emotional, like you're trying to get some emotional need met or some sort of comfort, things like that, or like you're trying to feel inspired or like uplifted in some way, like having a really great curated or well cooked creative meal is exciting, right? So a man who is doing that stuff, I think, is in touch with their own self and then can be in touch with
Mhm.
others. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think those are really great things. I think I would also add, a man who has like a nice balance of hobby versus like not letting that take over. Um, Someone who's interested in more things than just like work and,
Yeah.
you know, like having like a real interest in something. When you were talking about eating food and like curating something, that made me think like if you were someone who had a hobby, like maybe you're, making cabinetry or woodworking or like, or even, I don't know, building video games or something that was like took more than just like a one step process. There's like
Yeah.
multiple steps here that need to happen, and I'm thinking about it and I'm
Yeah.
creating, and it's not just like a survival, I got to fix the car because it's broken thing. It's like I'm actually curating something that would also signify care in my
Yeah.
mind.
The other big one that just came up as you were speaking about that's not really related. But yeah, yes, I definitely agree with you. Like a guy that has a hobby that he's invested in is also like an expression of like care of like it's care of their soul, right? It's like there's some kind of yearning or desire inside of my heart that I can't just immediately gratify or get. So
Mhm.
I have involved myself to do a bunch of steps to do that because it's meaningful to me.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a big positive sign. Um, and the one that came up when you were speaking there is also like honesty. That can be very difficult to discern, actually. And I know that's a problem on both sides of the fence. But like if you can tell that a man is being honest, um, then yeah, they're probably are doing or have done some work or already have like a good foundation, you know. Um, yeah. I mean, also like if they read books, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I heard this somewhere kind of a long time ago that there was when the printing press was invented, there was like really wish I could remember what this was or if I could find it, but there was like a really interesting like internal revolution that happened for humans, um that people became more caring because when you read a book, you hear about the character or the author's thoughts and feelings in much greater detail than you would through any other medium. You
Right.
know, most people in our Western culture don't speak at length about their internal landscape or internal processes. The word good is like a word the size of Mount Rushmore in the American lexicon. It's fucking huge. Um, People use the word good as this panacea of all their feelings that they're having, right? So uh yeah, the reading of books is you are able to see, hear, feel, imagine, the thoughts and feelings and experiences of another person that might be, vastly different from your own. So if a man is engaging in any kind of reading, they are inherently growing their awareness of others' experience and feelings. And um, I feel like I believe that it would be really hard for an individual not to grow by reading. If you read a book once a month or every other month, if you read 4 books a year, you're gonna have a change in perspective. You're gonna have like, oh, I never thought about that, or I never felt about that, or you're gonna have a new consideration about someone or something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
The other piece that you brought up was the therapist, and um and I kind of wanted to just dive in a little bit deeper about like how you said you don't like a person doesn't necessarily have to have a therapist, and I agree with all the caveats too, in that okay, if we're going to move in any direction where we're either like moving toward a therapist or maybe you've plateaued with the therapist work that you've been doing, or maybe you can't afford a therapist, or I don't know, maybe somewhere there's not a therapist available.
Mhm.
um I really think, and I've heard this a lot with the women that I work with about their men, in that like they refuse to talk to other people. And
Yeah.
I think in the same vein of what you're talking about with reading books, like it also means like how do we come together in community, and like how can community healing be um maybe not a replacement for therapy, but actually like an enhancement for therapy, or an enhancement in this healing work.
Yeah.
um in my mother circle work, I have seen how like I'll be talking about a concept, and the women in front of me, for example, maybe we're talking about birth, like return to a moment in time of your birth, and something that's like not too activating, right? Just like a little bit of a charge. If
Yeah.
you can sit in that and then actually move your body in a physical way of maybe you were laying on your back, maybe you were crawling on the floor, and what is that like, and the other person witnessing that, being with you in those like physical movements, there is like explosions of transformation that happens in
Yeah.
such a tiny little moment that like you would maybe possibly never experience in a therapist situation.
Yeah.
Again, I think that therapy is great. I think that everyone should have a therapist, and this is like a different kind of gathering, a different kind of like healing in group, and a different way to be in community. Because I think sometimes when women think about connecting with other women, it's like a vent circle, like this, it's like we get into like complaining.
Yeah.
And I can see where like offloading that energy is helpful, but there's something different about somatically moving together, somatically like connecting on maybe something you weren't even expecting. You know, I'm talking about labor, delivery, and birth, but like that action is just, that's just one thing we as a group, because it's a mother circle, that's what we have experienced.
Yeah.
That's everyone who is, well, I shouldn't say everyone who's a mother has experienced birth, but like everyone who's, because that's not true, but like everyone who has delivered a child can relate upon
Right.
whatever range of labor and delivery birth
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is. Um, and so I feel like, because even in my own situation and different conversations I've had, it's like, okay, if you're not going to go see a therapist, or if you can't have access to a therapist, or maybe you're not really ready for that deep dive of being seen, then a nice baby step or a nice like just different thing is to come together in community or come to get together in group to
Yeah.
discuss. I mean, I think about like AA meetings and how like that the situation there is like alcoholism or substance or something, and the relationship to the substance, you're coming together as a group with the common understanding that we all have some experience with this thing. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's car accident or something like that, but like coming together with some commonality and being able to like move together, or connect, talk about it together is like a different experience than just one-on-one therapy.
100% agree. Um, like it could be about like readiness. It could be about finances. And ultimately there's different things that are being offered, like somatics or just, I'm a huge believer that group work is necessary for like the highest levels of healing that a person can achieve. Like group work is extremely necessary. I don't think
Uh-oh.
without it. And also going back to the stuff about like therapy and a therapist, I also kind of feel like I don't think you can reach the highest levels of healing or wholeness or integration without a therapist. You don't have to have one the entire way of your journey, you know. But I think there's going to be critical parts where that type of help is necessary. Um, I feel like um, those people are in their container, like that um, is do this. They maybe don't do into the somatic group work or um, psychedelic medicine work or
I think we're having a little connection issue because you it keeps seeing you freeze. Are you having a connection issue or is it me?
it might be you. I got this. Maybe I should let me move. I'll get my computer closer to my router, but it shouldn't be an issue over here.
Are you hearing me like break up at all, or is
You cut out once or twice, but it hasn't been bad.
okay?
Yeah. Let's see if that does anything. Um, yeah. Uh, you don't need it the whole time, but I do believe that you you are going to need it at certain points, and it's critical that you have that help. Because these people are trained in working with the mind, with the non-physical aspect of yourself. And there can be people who are really skilled at doing that who are not trained therapists, but the fact of the matter is there are therapists that are very, very, very good and are going to help you in ways that you cannot understand and ways that you won't be able to find anywhere else.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
I think the it's interesting to contemplate the the history and the path that we've taken, like mental health, even when our generation was like children, they didn't want to be labeled certain things. Um, and that has kind of gone away now. Like that's already shifted so much.
Yes. Yeah.
And which like for the better, right? So that
Yeah.
our children can get the care that they need. But I'm also seeing this like new understanding, and I'm curious, I don't know, that's why I'm like bringing this to the conversation, but with our hyper individualism and like I can handle everything on my own, I'm curious if that's why some people sort of shy away from group work, but they're now okay with like individual therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because I have found, I mean, I've been in therapy for a long time, and so I've had so much great things happen in therapy, and it was like a different transformation whenever I started doing group work. Even
Yeah.
at the therapist office that I was at, I started. That was kind of actually my first experience with like group therapy, and it was group therapy where
Yeah.
we all came together and had a conversation
Yeah.
around a certain topic,
Yeah.
and I wonder what it is going to take for people to see that like, and I don't want to be like, well, great, you've made it to a therapist and now that's not enough.
Right. Right.
It's more
Right.
like it is such a dynamic approach. It's such a holistic um, view of like mental health, physical health, spiritual health to kind of tackle all of these things. And you and I are in this world, so like it's easy for us to see what might be possible or have access to those body sensations we were talking about. But I wonder for the average person who isn't in the wellness world, how I could see them listening to us and being like, "Oh my god, that's overwhelming," and then almost in like a freeze place.
Yeah. Totally.
But
Yeah.
it's almost like the normalization of group therapy or group work needs to be out there so that people even know that that's a possibility, because like you said, group work is almost like imperative at some point. You don't
Yes.
have to do everything all at once.
Right.
And
You don't
maybe,
need it forever.
right. And it's like one thing will work for a little while, but then how do you know it's time to shift to something else? And
Right.
when do you need to shift back to the other thing or four other things, whatever it might be?
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I hear you. Like that information needs to be out there more. Like you were talking about, I feel like we have just entered a period with our generation, the millennials are like maybe the first generation where it's like therapy is good, it's important, and we need it. Gen X was kind of like, no, it's not as bad as my parents thought it was, but we're probably the first generation that was like, I want and need one,
yeah.
clearly, right? Yeah, therapy, thumbs up. Um, like I want and need one, and that's imperative. So it's kind of like the door has just opened for the first time. Like
Yeah.
this it's now acceptable and becoming normative, right? And this is like it's like walking in the grocery store and here's the first end cap that's got like Oreos on it. And you're like, "Oh my God, sweet." But it's like, no, there's a whole fucking store, right? So
Cookie
people
aisle.
yeah, there's a whole cookie aisle, right? So you're going into this being like, I'm going to heal and help myself, and you're just grabbing the Oreos off the end cap. When
Yeah.
it's like, no, there's like oatmeal chocolate chip down there and like shortbread, those little ones that have the windmill on it that go in your tea. Like, uh, yeah. So the world of of help and healing is opening up, and therapy is like the number one thing because it's part of the Western world that's coming from the logical mind of psychoanalysis. That is like what we know. That is the healing technique that Western society and like Western Europe and America has developed. They're like, this is how we heal, right? And the whole world and whole of human history has all these other tools, resources, and things that they have come up with to help people heal. And it's like, all right, now we're saying it's acceptable and necessary to heal if we want to have better lives and a better world and a better planet. And here's therapy, and here's this. Here's tribal dance. Here's singing and using your voice. Here's movement therapy. Here's group therapy, right? Here's journaling. Here's art, painting, right? So learning that therapy isn't the whole package. It's important, and it's one that we as a Western society have created. It's good to recognize that and to like open yourself to utilize and find these other tools, because like you might start out and go to a therapist and it sucks and you're not getting anywhere. It's like maybe that's not the place for you to start. Maybe you start with singing. Maybe you join a chorus and that starts to open you up, starts to open your mind or open your emotions or open the doors that all the hurt and pain are behind, so you can get in touch with that and help reintegrate that. So I guess maybe a message for anyone who's listening here is, if you feel like therapy isn't for you, or if it's failed or it hasn't done anything for you, keep looking. Like that's like healing is like you have to keep doing it. And like you were saying earlier, I don't know if we're ever fully healed. And some people might be triggered by that, but it's like that's the attitude you should have, because having that attitude means that you're going to keep looking at yourself and investigating your own behavioral patterns, mental and emotional patterns. And that's going to result in greater levels of harmony internally and externally.
Mhm. Well, that goes back to what you were saying about the human experience is pain and pleasure. I mean, obviously, there's the variance in between those things, but like being born is not always a pleasurable experience. So you come into this world with a certain level of experience, of like high charge experience. And then things happen through life. This was I had this conversation with my 10-year-old the other day. I had a friend, like, old friend. We went to massage school together. I don't think you know this person, but I don't think you guys were in the same class. But she was in a pretty horrific car accident the other day. And I'm
Wow.
like kind of talking out loud about like some of her physical ailments that had happened. And my 10-year-old is really squeamish about these things. And it's not so much like blood and guts, it's more like experience, like that had to have hurt. And he was like, stop talking about it, stop talking about it. And so I did. But then the next day we had this conversation. I was like, listen, I want you to experience what I'm talking about, that this is painful. There's a person who went through something painful.
Yeah.
And if and when you experience something in your life that is traumatic, because it's going to happen, it
Yeah.
will happen, whether it's to his body or someone else's body. Like trauma is part of living,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That I want you to have like a little titration or a little capacity to handle difficult things. So I understand this is uncomfortable for you. And
Yeah.
I'll be with you here as we talk about this. Like I'm here, like
Yeah.
as we talk about how uncomfortable that poor the poor person, the whole thing is terrible. This is how we like drip that like little experience
Yeah.
out. It's like that capacity thing. It's
Yeah.
the ability to hold
Yeah.
things that are hard, things that are painful. I could imagine if someone was taught like therapy means you're weak or broken or something, um, that it would be hard to like make that phone call or like, get that set up. And I just think, yeah, you're so good with metaphors, which like the cookie aisle is perfect. And it's like, um, if Oreos aren't your bag, then there's something else that can open you up just a little bit to be able to receive the pain and the healing
Yeah.
and then the pleasure
Yeah.
that is part of being alive.
Yeah.
So if you want to feel more alive, more fulfilled, you're gonna have to feel it uh, to some degree, right? You're gonna have to move through it.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree. And like, I think that's something important to recognize, that by shying away from our pain that we have in life, from our upbringing, from trauma, interactions, accidents, by like hiding from that pain and shying away from it, we are limiting our experience of life. We are closing ourselves off and putting ourselves in a smaller box of life, because when we decrease our capacity to interact with and engage with pain and feel it. I'm not saying that you need to feel everything. I'm not saying that you need to relive your traumatic childhood.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily equal healing. Like,
No.
go through reliving, remembering, or refeeling that does not always equal healing. I know some people have that perspective. I disagree. I think that sometimes feeling it is important and sometimes it's not. Um, but anyway, you do have to have a willingness to be uncomfortable and engage with that discomfort. And like, it's just, what we're talking about is your instrument of sensitivity, right? If you decrease, it's just one thing. It's like you're like a thermometer, right? You're if you decrease the range, like if you're like, I don't want my thermometer to measure too much heat. It's like, okay, then the whole spectrum shrinks. The whole thing shrinks, right? So by saying, I don't want to feel or notice too much pain, it's like, okay, well, you're not going to feel or notice too much pleasure either, or joy, right?
Mhm.
So, if you want a bigger, more impactful, more real, in-depth, experience of life, you're going to have to touch into that discomfort. And in doing so, I think most people realize that they can handle a lot more. And it's not actually bad, it's neutral, right? We assign it as bad, but it's just a feeling.
It's just the thing.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that is a necessary component to living a fuller life,
Mhm.
a life that includes both. It's a broadening of the spectrum.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah. And it's hard to do, honestly, especially for those of us who are really mentally oriented, because you're already in a space where you don't have to feel or notice as much, when you are like filtering everything through the mind and filtering everything through like anticipation or prediction, or um conceptualization, right? Like, you're already limiting it, and you're being asked to like, no, don't think about it. Actually feel it somehow. And you already have an aversion to that. And so there might be like a fear response to like, hey, it's okay to feel this. It's okay to actually have these emotions or have these experiences. And you're like, no, it's not. And we're saying that some of the healing comes with that. And so you're saying, what I what I need to do to heal is to feel things that I don't want to feel. So there's resistance to it.
Mhm.
It can be challenging.
Yeah, and I think I just to touch one more moment on the community, like and the aisle of cookies to choose from, is like I really think we can't put all of our cookies in one basket, if you will,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
That like it does take a team of people to
yeah,
give you
yeah,
options, suggestions, and in an ideal world, they all be kind of like working together, which you know sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. But
yeah,
I would love to see more of that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's true. You don't just eat spaghetti and meatballs your entire life. You eat a lot of different meals,
Yeah.
over different periods of time. And same with your healing. There's going to be a lot of different resources and people and groups that you need for sure.
And there's going to be some that just don't work. And when we cultivate those body sensors,
Yeah.
you can walk into a room and be like, well, this isn't it,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yep.
know?
Yeah. It's yeah. That's true. I always have something that would be an interesting conversation. I always have I know that is a widely preached piece of advice these days. Like to trust your intuition or follow your joy or something like that. And I'm 100% on board with that. And I think there needs to be a conversation around discerning when is this your legitimate intuition and when is this like a fear or discomfort response?
Yeah.
Because you could mistake the two and you could be like, oh, that did not feel right. These were not the right people. And it's like, okay, is that true? Or are you being triggered into discomfort and you want
Right.
to avoid the discomfort,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes it's you maybe you need to stick around a little longer to see if you are being asked to be uncomfortable and you're running away from that,
Right.
or are you actually intuiting that these are not the people or services that I need in the moment?
Right. Well, and I would also say you could say the same thing about pleasure and joy, right? Because like if I'm gonna have to choose between like running a mile or watching a movie on the couch with my kids, like I know that answer. I don't want to run, like I don't
Right,
want to
right.
run. I want to sit on the couch. But like that's that joy pleasure thing too, where it's like, does this feel good or does this feel activating in like this pleasurable, productive, like moving forward kind of way?
Yeah,
Like maybe running a mile would be good. It's not good for me, but maybe it would be good, to like get up and move. And sometimes you feel better after you move, regardless.
yeah,
So I think sometimes our dial is a little bit
yeah,
need to like tune in to our dial a bit.
yeah.
It's that intuition, yes, but like how do you actually know? How do
Right.
you know it's your intuition? And I know that there's a lot of like trauma somatic people who talk about this. Like, what's the difference between your intuition and like your trigger or
Yeah,
like your responses?
yeah,
And I mean, I'm going to be like saying this over and over, but it's like when we tune into our body sensors and our body wisdom and we begin to cultivate that trust, that's
yeah,
intuition.
yeah, yeah. It's yes, I would say so. Yeah. It can be hard to discern at times. It can be really hard to discern, especially if you're just starting out and you don't have a great deal of awareness of yourself. When you get triggered, it could feel like a whole bunch of shit in your body and you're like, nope, this is bad news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think a good advice for anyone along people at different points along that journey or level of experience or whatever is like um it's what is it? It just disappeared. Oh. uh oh yeah, okay. It's to like um uh not be so hard lined in your distinction of good and bad or right or wrong or pleasurable or painful,
Mhm.
right? Because like we kind of sometimes we can't know in the moment if something is bad, right? We can know it's uncomfortable or we can know it's painful, right? But there might be something of value there. So it's like, don't be so quick to make don't make just snap judgments based upon like trust and honor your intuition, but also be willing to investigate sometimes. Is that really true? Um, is there something here for me? You
Mhm.
know, A really good example is um like 3 years ago, I was invited by a yoga teacher to do massage on a retreat she was offering in Central America. And this woman, just simply by how she communicated with me, I was like, there were some red flags. I was like, something's kind of off with this woman. There was a lot of lots of green flags, but then there was some red flags. And I was like, I don't know that I should do this. But there were there were green flags, and the opportunity that was presented to me was also like attractive and felt like it would give me something of value and import. So I was like, okay, I'm strong enough in myself and my identity to mitigate or to not be negatively affected by whatever red flags are here that I don't have full awareness of. I trusted myself in that, and I said, okay, I know something's not quite right, but I'm going to do this anyway. And on the retreat, the individual really had a meltdown, and basically was the worst example of leadership, one of the worst that I could think of. And so yeah, but like I met an individual there who would become a close friend who opened a lot of other doors for me, so like I was aware, my intuition told me that there was like an opportunity for pain or difficulty or discomfort because of this woman. But, my intuition couldn't see all the other things that might come about from this experience that really, um, like meeting that person opened a lot of doors and created a lot of things in my life that were majorly good and important. And like I the where I run my men's group is because of like that person, and I've done a whole bunch of psychedelic therapy because of that person. And like legitimate, like good ethical psychedelic therapy, not just like someone in yoga pants who thinks that they can serve medicine. Right. Um, yeah, so that's just an example. Like sometimes you need to investigate deeper than just a snap, like that's wrong or bad, or making a judgment. Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example.
yeah, yeah,
I think yeah, intuition is a lifelong honing, especially when we are mostly socialized to like disengage that system.
yeah,
So it's it's all about, gaining back. That's another reason why we're never actually healed, right? We're always in healing because there's just been a lot of like programming for better or worse. Like it's not saying one thing is bad or not, it's like we're all socialized in a certain way,
yeah,
and part of living, I believe, is to unsocialize yourself a bit,
yeah,
to find like your true self and those kind of things.
yeah.
um yeah, I think we covered a lot of really great ground. I don't want to make it too long for everyone. Did you have
Agreed.
any like last thoughts?
Last thoughts. Yeah. Um, yeah, we were talking about men, we were talking about growing spheres of awareness, how that happens. I want to like bookmark for a conversation for another day of it was there's another avenue for like growth of awareness. It's not just like a painful experience in your life or a painful experience in another's life. I want to talk about how else it comes about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think we covered some really good things. I really liked talking about, because I think it's crazy valuable, like that the opportunities for healing and avenues and modes of healing are vast, and that you as an individual need to explore them, and should be looking a lot, for different things.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. What about you? Anything it really hit you, or that you're taking away, or think's important?
Um, I mean, I think a lot of women are having conversations about, well, we know about the man and the bear conversation in the woods, and we know about this kind of collective transformation, awakening, if you will, about the energies of masculine and feminine and what does that mean. Um, and I think that I just think that there are a lot more women than maybe people realize that are saying, okay, I've been on this healing journey and I recognize what the culture has done to men and what the society has pushed them into, and
Yeah.
who are the ones that are open and willing and ready for the next stage of transformation. And, I think that notion of like the women who see that in men, the conversation is different. When women get together, our conversations are different about men.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not all men are bad. It's more like what's going, like, who do we know is safe now, or like what's happening, or like who, how can I recognize who is the man or the bear?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
um so I would like to see more of that evolution of conversation, right? For women who are trying to have fulfilling lives, but also for our children who, you know, need to know these things too.
Yeah. Let's talk about that more.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's when you were talking about that, I think there is a great opportunity and a future where like there are circles where men and women meet and talk about healing and experiences as like a man, like men being able to express their vulnerabilities to like women that they do not know, right? Like and vice versa. For like maybe a bridge to be built there. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because it's very clear to me that women are really yearning for more healed men that are available to partner with.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, okay, we know that some men are inherently bad or unsafe and are never going to heal. But there are now some that are out there that are safe and are healing and doing work. How do we find them? And how do we discern the difference between, who's in which category? And
And
that
I would also bring to light that there's another category of like fake healing. People who
yeah,
are like
yeah,
work, but they're like not doing the
yeah,
work.
yeah. We need to let's maybe we'll talk about that next time. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
because
Okay, we'll put that
that's
on the docket.
yeah, that's some real shit. We need to talk about that for sure. So
Yeah. All right. I'll stop.
it's yeah, this was a great conversation as always, and I guess I'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.